Dear participants, hi. Welcome to the 20th Science and Society meetings of Istanbul Commerce University. Today we are hosting a very important contributor, Professor Dr. J. Barney. As you know, he is a very well-known strategic management professor, and we are honored that he will be our guest today. And Professor Dr. Elçin Aykaç Alp will make an introduction speech. Welcome, hocam. Welcome, Professor Barney. So that we will ask our questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Karabulut. And thank you, Professor Barney. I'm also very pleased to host you in our university in this webinar. And this webinar has a really important topic, the resource-based view. As we know, it's one of your important contribution to our field, to this field, to management field. And this theory highlights companies, the resources, rare resources, substitutable resources are important for companies and important for their competitive advantages. So I want to thank you. You will give us valuable comments, valuable information about this topic. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and I would like to say that we would also want to see you in our university in Istanbul. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elçin hocam. Dear Professor Barney, I'm very happy that I'm hosting you today. I'm honored because I always lecture about your contributions. So I'm very happy, I'm very pleased. Thank you very much once again. And I would like to start with the first question. Could you please explain?
Could you speak up a little bit? I lost you this second.
Sure. Could you please explain resource-based view, which is your contribution to the field of management?
Well, that's a big question. I think that, I started working on this set of ideas in the early 1980s, 1984, actually. And at the time, the field of strategic management was dominated by Porter's perspective, sort of the perspective derived from the structured conduct performance paradigm, which I'm sure you know. And I was quite dissatisfied with the Porter framework. It seemed to me that it did an okay job of analyzing industries, but that was not the only thing that was going on in understanding why some firms outperformed others. I just saw too much heterogeneity in firm performance within industries. So in any case, so the original work was an attempt to try to, what I thought at first was to address a set of questions about firm level resources and capabilities that were not well addressed by the Porter framework. Over time, I've come to conclude that in fact, the Porter framework and resource-based theory represent two competing models of how firms can generate economic value. The Porter framework is based at its core on a monopoly theory of economic profits, where firms operate in industries that are highly concentrated and protected by barriers to entry, and in so doing are able to generate economic profits when appropriate. Whereas resource-based theory looks at firms that operate in more competitive settings, but where firms control valuable, rare, and cost-limited non-substitutable resources capabilities. And they generate economic profits because they more efficiently address customer needs than other firms. And other firms can't imitate those things at low cost because of the nature of those capabilities. So, so those represent two completely different models for how profits are generated: monopoly profits versus efficiency profits. They have a bunch of other implications. So for example, from a social welfare point of view, Porter's framework is inconsistent with social welfare. Whereas from the efficiency point of view, resource-based theory is completely consistent with social welfare because firms are taking the resources they have and using them to more efficiently address consumer needs. And so both the firm and the consumer are better off, as would be the case in any free trade. So that was the initial set of ideas. The original motivation for, well, initially it was just to fill out the logic of Porter's work is on industries and my work was on firms' capabilities, but later on it became much clearer what the difference between the two models were.
Thank you very much. So we always lecture about it, and I assign homeworks to our students about your resource-based view. So, Hamidettin, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My question is, do you think what kind of researches companies should have to survive and have a sustainable competitive advantage in the new era?
In the new era, meaning the digital world, or?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be interesting to watch. I think the underlying logic of resource-based theory is unlikely to be changed, but the specific, how that specific logic is applied in a digital context is likely to change in the following sense. Certainly to the extent that digital capabilities are widely used and widely available to lots of firms, then while that applying those digital capabilities can be a source of social welfare, improving consumers' lives, et cetera, it wouldn't be a source of advantage for any one firm because all firms can use this technology equally well, then there wouldn't be any distinctions among firms. So as always, resource-based theory would have us focus our attention on the differential abilities of firms to apply digital technologies in various ways. And so in that sense, it still leads us in that direction. Now, what the direction of asymmetries and heterogeneity. So what are those capabilities? And I don't know the answer to that question. That was going to require a lot of empirical work to be able to examine what makes it possible for some firms to be more digitally effective than others. It is interesting, though, that the digital revolution has sort of resurfaced the Porterian model of profit generation with the emergence of very important positive network externalities, which create de facto monopolies in certain industries because of these network effects. So in social media, we have some very, very large firms that dominate because the more members they get, the more valuable they are to the members, and thus they have positive network effects. So it's not like in the digital world that questions of monopoly and inefficiency go away. They certainly get transformed and deserve close attention. In the same way, I would suspect that at the firm level, in terms of the individual resources and capabilities, why some firms are more able than others to use these capabilities is hard to know. I'll give you a really specific example. I'm writing a book right now with a friend of mine who's a former CEO, so four-time CEO. And we're just talking to our editor right now about our marketing plan, which, you know, I don't know anything about. I'm not a marketing person at all. But my colleague, my co-author, actually is a very good marketer, it turns out. And he knows a whole bunch of stuff about social media that I don't know. So the first thing that became obvious to me is in developing a marketing plan that's social media driven, that the right thing to do for me was to work with this guy and let him do most of the work. I'll do whatever I can do, but it's just not I don't have the resources or capabilities. I stopped being on Facebook 5 years ago because I thought it was a complete waste of my time. So I just deleted myself from Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. I'm just not a social media guy. And so it's hard for me to have those capabilities, but he has those capabilities. And hopefully between the two of us, we can do that. So I recognize there are heterogeneities in these skills and I don't have them. So, but that's okay.
Okay.
I can partner with people that do.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ibrahim Sherif, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would love to ask a question. Good evening, professors. It's a pleasure. I'm so happy to be part of this great opportunity. Professor, I would like to know what is the role of entrepreneurs and companies in order to gain sustainable competitive advantage?
I didn't quite understand. What's the role of what?
What is the role of entrepreneurs?
Oh, entrepreneurs.
Yes, and companies in order to gain sustainable competitive advantage?
That's a great question, actually. Some of you may be aware that I have a second area of work in entrepreneurship that I've been doing for the last 2 years, primarily with Professor Sharon Alvarez at the University of Pittsburgh. One of the reasons I was interested in entrepreneurship is because it provided, I hoped it would provide a solution to one of the challenges of resource-based theory. Resource-based theory takes the heterogeneity of firms as given and then asks how do firms exploit that heterogeneity in ways that generate sustained competitive advantage. But it doesn't explain, doesn't even try to explain in its initial formulation where firm heterogeneity comes from. In fact, I was actually quite explicit to say, yeah, we're just not going to deal with that question because I thought it was a hard problem. So I was initially interested in studying entrepreneurship as a way of understanding where firm heterogeneity comes from. So I did some work in the early 80s and mid 80s, and it was not that helpful at that time. But then Professor Alvarez and I started working on this creation approach in entrepreneurship, where entrepreneurs engage in an evolutionary process of creating the opportunities they end up exploiting. And one of the reasons I was excited about that and working on that was that it is one explanation, certainly not the only explanation, but one explanation about where heterogeneity comes from. How is it that different firms end up where heterogeneity comes from? How is their capabilities? And so, from a theoretical point of view, I'm going to have to move here. Because I'm getting feedback, I can't quite. Okay, we're good. It's one good way of one link between research on entrepreneurship and resource-based theory is entrepreneurship is a way for us to understand where heterogeneity comes from. In terms of entrepreneurship within organizations, well, Williamson would suggest that's almost a contradiction in terms, but we can set that aside for a moment. But I think that the question of innovation, which is the way we usually think about what happened, the language we use for talking what happens within firms, that's an area that's ripe for discussion and debate and further theoretical development. It is the case that some firms are clearly more innovative than others. That's a source of heterogeneity, which can be very, very important in explaining why some firms outperform others. And so, I mean, we study firms like Apple, for example, to understand how is it they were able to develop iPads, iPhones, and all the other products that made such a difference and made them such a valuable company. And those are studying internal organizational capabilities that have a strong entrepreneurial flavor about them. But to the extent that entrepreneurship involves creating a separate firm, then entrepreneurship doesn't typically happen within a corporation. It usually happens outside. But that we can talk about whether that's true or not. But there are firms who try to recreate the market dynamics of entrepreneurship within a firm. There are some pharmaceutical companies, for example, that try to do that, but they usually don't do particularly well making that happen. There are some things about being an independent entrepreneurial entity that enable you to do things that are harder to do in a corporate setting, and vice versa. There's, each have their efficiency. But in terms of innovation, that's an incredibly important topic in resource-based theory. I wish we knew, frankly, more about innovative capabilities, what they are, how they're distributed across a population of firms. That is, how rare are they, and why are they constantly imitated? I suspect there are lots of socially complex reasons why innovation is costly to imitate. It could be that the innovative processes are deeply embedded within a particular culture of the organization, or reflecting unique history of the company. Lots of reasons, but again, I think we've spent. This is going to be my own strong opinion. I think we spent way too much time counting patents, and not enough time understanding innovation. The two things are not the same at all in my mind. So, and for that reason, I think innovation continues to be an important potential source of theoretical work and empirical work related to resource-based theory.
Thank you very much. Actually,
Thank you.
No problem.
MBA was entrepreneurship as well. And so these explanations were very nice for me as well. So Kautar, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, of course. Hello, Professor. How are you? I hope you're
I'm
all
good.
doing well.
Very well. Thank you.
So my question is, do you think that entrepreneurs should have different approaches than managers in the new era?
Guys, great question. Let me go back to this creation discovery distinction that Professor Alvarez and I have been developing over the years. The discovery perspective makes the argument that entrepreneurial opportunities, which is defined as competitive imperfections in product or factor markets, but that these opportunities are objective, they exist independent of entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs discover them. That's the language discovery. One of the implications of discovery theory is that entrepreneurs should be somehow systematically different from non-entrepreneurs, including managers in large organizations. And there's been a variety of hypotheses that have been examined empirically about what those differences might be. Several years ago, I haven't done this in a while, maybe 10, 15 years, but 15 years ago, a student of mine did a thorough review of that entrepreneurial differences literature and said that there's no systematic differences that have been demonstrated, with one exception. And that exception is the extent to which entrepreneurs and managers demonstrate certain cognitive biases. And the cognitive biases, and this was actually work that was done by a doctoral student of mine, Lowell Busnitz, who has since retired. He used to be at the University of Oklahoma, and myself. We have a paper that demonstrates that entrepreneurs demonstrate two cognitive biases to a much greater degree than non-entrepreneurs. The two biases are the representativeness bias, which is a willingness to generalize from small samples, and then the overconfidence bias, which is your willingness to be confident about your ability to generalize from small samples. But that paper explicitly does not say whether these two cognitive biases that we identify are the cause of entrepreneurship or the effect of entrepreneurship. It can go either way. So but the fundamental sort of trait-based models of difference between entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs simply hasn't generated any results. So, for example, there are no gender effects, there are no IQ effects, there are no educational effects, there are no family effects. there are no risk aversion effects. Entrepreneurs are not less risk averse than non-entrepreneurs. Now that might seem crazy, but it's actually understandable if you add in the cognitive biases that I just described, because what it turns out is that the reason that the underlying risk preferences of entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs are not systematically different. I'm not saying there isn't variance, but if you take a large sample and divide it into entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs and calculate the means, there's no difference in the means between risk aversion. Okay. What's happening though is that if you're willing to generalize from small samples and are very confident in your ability to do that, then you don't see things as risky. So you may not be more risk averse, but you just don't see things as risky. So it's a cognitive, not a personality thing. But anyway, there's no systematic difference with regard to the big 5 psychological attributes. So all that said, just got a note I have to take to myself 1 second. All that said, we don't still have a very good understanding if there are differences between entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs and what those differences might be. So we're not good at that. That said, one thing we aren't reasonably confident about is that the context within which entrepreneurs operate is typically closer to Knightian uncertainty as opposed to risk, where managers typically operate. And we are beginning to have a much better sense of what are the managerial and other actions, leadership, management, team building, those kinds of things that are required under conditions of uncertainty as opposed to under conditions of risk. So while at a personality level, entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs may not be that different, except for these cognitive differences, it may be that they have to use very different tools, managerial tools, in order to accomplish their various tasks. And we're only beginning to understand that. I'll give you an example. I have a paper with several PhD students in SEJ that makes the argument that about how do entrepreneurs attract human capital. And there's lots of stories told, but there's a really simple observation, which is that under conditions of discovery, that is when you're operating under conditions of risk, the way it works is the entrepreneurs discover the opportunity, figure out how to build it, take advantage of it, and then use knowledge about that opportunity to enroll human capital. So the business plan comes first, and enrolling human capital comes second. Under creation, that's not possible. What happens is you enroll human capital first, and then you co-create the opportunity that you're going to exploit. And understanding the differences between just in terms of enrolling human capital, understanding the differences between those two approaches, build a business model, then enroll human capital versus enroll human capital and then build the business model are fundamental, are huge. And so my sense is that there will be a huge difference between the tools that are used by entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs. Although, like I said, we've been focusing on the wrong thing. We've been focusing on their personalities. No, bad choice. We need to focus on what they do, what our context forces them to do. So for example, if you're in a world of risk and you can estimate the probability that an opportunity will generate profits, you can use logic and rationale to encourage people to join your entrepreneurial endeavor. But under conditions of uncertainty, you can't use the business model to convince people. You have to use your personality, your charisma, your trust that you have. So for example, we would expect social network ties to be much more important under conditions of uncertainty than they would be under conditions of risk. And we have research to suggest that. So in any case, so I think that from a research point of view, the big task is to shift our attention away from personality difference between entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs, and instead focus on the management and leadership tools that people who are operating in uncertainty versus risk will have to use. That seems to me much more interesting. And you know, I don't think we know a lot about that. Be a great dissertation topic.
Thank you
I
so
can't hear you.
much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Advantage, you know, to ask questions to you. So it's a good advantage for them. So we would like to take one more time. Emily, would you like to ask a question, please?
I can't hear you, Professor.
Emily is going to ask a question. So
Okay, please.
Yeah. Emily.
Good evening, dear professors. My question is, do you think another view on gaining competitive advantage could be emerged due to COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah. The answer almost is always everything that is perceived as a threat to some firms will be seen as an opportunity to other firms. It's always. It's not universal. The reason for that, of course, is firms are heterogeneous with respect to their resources and capabilities. And so, for example, if you're really good at developing, designing, and distributing vaccines, this is a pretty good time to be in the world. If that's not one of your capabilities, then this time sucks. I mean, every day in the journal, in the Wall Street Journal, I read, I read this morning, a great article on Virgin Airlines, and the airline industry has been ransacked. Transportation in general has been just really hurt by COVID-19. But it turns out that, according to the article I read this morning, that Virgin Airlines was already in horrible shape. They were financially almost bankrupt. They had an old fleet of 747s, and they used the COVID downturn as a way to refinance themselves, to get rid of old airplanes, to bring in 777s and new airplanes. And they're actually emerging out of COVID stronger than they came into COVID. That's only because they were so weak going into COVID. So I think there are going to be lots and lots of examples of firms. Food delivery firms, for example, have done very well during COVID. Some pharmaceutical companies have done well. Amazon is just doing extremely well. Bricks and mortar have been hurting, although right now in the States, I'm not sure what it's like in Turkey, but in the States now, people are so fed up from not being able to go out that they're going out for any reason. My assistant is coming in today because I had to come in, not because she has to, because I think she just wants to get out of the house. It's just crazy. So it'll be interesting to see how those things evolve. But yeah, absolutely, there are plenty of opportunities embedded in this disaster. In saying that, I don't want to discount the disaster in any sense. It's a horrible tragedy for many, many people and many, many families, of course, and that's just terrible. But that doesn't mean there aren't business opportunities. But by the way, I'm not in a position to tell you what those are going to be. Yeah, e-commerce. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you here. If I could tell you what the 5 biggest opportunities are because of COVID, I wouldn't do so. I would exploit them myself. One of the constraints on resource-based theory is called the rules for riches paradox, which is that there cannot be rules for riches, because if I can tell Emil how to become wealthy, regardless of any resources and capability constraints he might have, I can tell him how to become wealthy, then I can tell anyone how to become wealthy, and no one's wealthy. The only person who makes money with a rules for riches is the person who sells the rules for riches. Everyone else breaks even. No competitive advantage.
Thanks so much for answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Abdülmennan, would you like to ask a question? Abdülmennan. maybe we can go to the other question. Sabri Bhai, would you like to ask a question?
Excuse me, if Abdulmanan not have, I can to ask. Good day, dear Professor, Mr. Professor. Thank you very much for very useful information, for useful speech. I want to ask you about what is the role of the stakeholders for a company under conditions of uncertainty, please.
Okay, sure. So let me answer in two steps. First of all, I published a paper in 2018 in the Strategic Management Journal that asked made the argument that resource-based theory has to adopt a stakeholder perspective. I will tell you, just to let you know, that I went 30 or 40 years in my career arguing against stakeholder theory because I thought it was had a lot of theoretical limitations and didn't provide much practical guidance either. I still think that's true, by the way. I think most stakeholder theory is not terribly precise. There are some very good stakeholder theories, don't get me wrong, but sort of the general notion of what stakeholder theory is not very precise. I'm sure some of you know about the group of American businesses recently, called the Business Roundtable, recently, a couple of years ago now, announced that they were going to change their corporate purpose from maximizing shareholders' wealth to addressing the needs of all their stakeholders. But the statement, address the needs of all their stakeholders, is a statement without content. It actually is a meaningless statement. It's only possible to address all the needs of all of your stakeholders if those stakeholders all happen to have the same interests in how they like to see a firm managed. That seems extremely unlikely in most settings. And so to me, it's just PR nonsense. And there's some data that suggests that these firms have not changed their governance approach at all. So I think it's just cheap talk. So I still think stakeholder theory has a lot of holes to fill. But what the SMJ paper argument makes is that despite those real theoretical difficulties, it turns out that in order for firms to attract the resources, the kinds of resources and capabilities they need in order to generate an economic profit in the way that resource-based theory suggests can be generated, then they're going to have to treat at least one of their stakeholders as residual claimants. All you have to do to demonstrate that the finance assumption that the only residual claimant is shareholders is to demonstrate that, in fact, in order to generate economic profits, at least one non-shareholder stakeholder has to be treated as a residual claimant. And that's what the paper does. And it's very simple to state the argument. I use transaction cost economics and incomplete contract theory to make the story, but it's a very non-technical way of summarizing it. It's really simple. So this is the deal finance, with its emphasis on shareholders, would have us make with stakeholders. Okay, you guys are all stakeholders. I'm the firm. Here's what I want to do. I want you to invest your time, talent, and treasure in me, the firm. I want you to give me your loyalty and trust. I want you to work hard. I want you to be creative and innovative. I want you to work together as a team. I want you to make all these highly specialized investments in me and what my firm is doing. And I'm going to take all those specialized investments and we're going to create together, we're going to generate economic profits that we're going to give to the shareholders. Why would any self-regarding stakeholder agree to that? It's stupid. It's stupid. And the answer is they don't. They won't. So if you take this to the extreme and say that the only residual claimants for a firm are and should be only shareholders, then you're also saying firms will never be able to attract the resources, capabilities needed to generate an economic profit. Okay. Put it a different way, finance does not have a theory of where economic profits come from because it eliminates the possibility of economic profits by assuming that the only residual claimant is a firm shareholder. The only way you can get economic profits, I'm setting aside monopoly profits, but the only way you can get efficiency profits is if you go to a stakeholder and say, hey, work together, co-specialize, all that stuff, loyalty, trust, and if, because we live in a world of risk and uncertainty, if our work generates economic profits, then some of that will be shared with you. And then people might be incentivized to make those specific investments. Now, by the way, that leads to a whole bunch of other questions. I'm working on another paper right now that tries to address another one of those questions, which is, suppose there are two firms here, me, and I am genuinely committed to your interests as a stakeholder, another firm, and I'm committed to your interests as a stakeholder as long as they further my interests for shareholders. How does I as a stakeholder, how does you as a stakeholder tell the difference between those two firms? Interesting question. Unless you can tell the difference between them, you're likely to assume that they're both ingenuine and thus not avoid making specific investments. So anyway, we're writing a paper that tries to address that problem. It's not been addressed in stakeholder theory. How does that, so that's how I think stakeholder theory, for me, people ask me how I come up with research ideas. And this is a very strange response perhaps, but my problem is not coming up with research ideas, questions. My problem is I come up with too many. I don't have enough time to develop them all. Literally almost every day I come up with another idea for a really cool paper to write, but I don't have time to write them all. And part of the reason for that is right now, I think this is a very biased opinion, obviously, from my point of view. Right now, we are in this new period of time where we have to explore the implications of taking a stakeholder perspective for strategic management much more thoroughly and carefully than has been done in the past. And a whole bunch of really hard questions need to be answered. And we don't have the answer for them. They're not answered by traditional stakeholder theory. Ed Freeman sort of has, in his most recent book, has sort of assumed away some of the most critical questions that need to be answered. Don't get me wrong, I have great respect for Ed, so I want to talk to him about that. I don't understand that. But nevertheless, these are extremely hard questions to answer. And if I was, this would be the best time ever to start in this career substantively as an intellectual exercise, because we're just at this whole new set of issues. And smart people are trying really hard to try to figure out the answer to these questions. And that should be an indicator that they're important questions. You know, Anita McGann and Helly Wang and Joe Mahoney and smart people are trying to figure this stuff out. So this is a good time to be a rookie in this area. So now the second part of that question was under uncertainty. How does stakeholder logic change under uncertainty? That's I don't know. That's a question I would love to write a paper about. I mean, I can think of some things almost immediately. So, for example, under conditions of uncertainty, it would be difficult for a firm to know what the preferences of different stakeholders would be, because they could be changing radically under uncertainty. So that's an interesting problem, isn't it? I don't know how to optimize in that world. So yeah, I think that's just an example of the kind of question we really need to address. There might be some diversification stories to play with risk. I don't know. It's a great question.
Okay.
Write the paper.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Hello, Professor Barney. It's an honor to have you here with us this evening in Turkey. Thank you for your participation and valuable information you share with us. I just want to ask a question about social entrepreneurs. I guess that you had kind of such an interesting subject in your portfolio, let's say.
I do.
And what do you think about the forces behind entrepreneurial capabilities of social entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I actually have a chair in social entrepreneurship, though I'm not sure the term actually has much meaning. Let me step back and say, for those who don't know, there's no reason you would know, but I have, for the last 20 years, I've been teaching a class in economic development and entrepreneurship. And it involves half a semester on various topics in this context. And then we take students to developing economies where we have them work with small entrepreneurial firms, most of them women-owned, it turns out, in places like Bolivia, Peru, and Ghana. And we do a consulting project with them. So that's the context here. Let me step one second back. And so the concept of social entrepreneurship in development, in developing economies, is actually quite problematic to me. I actually have had people, sort of venture capital firms in this space, make the following statement: we would invest in this business, but they're not social enough in their orientation. My own experience is that the most socially responsible thing that entrepreneurial firms can do in terms of generating economic development is to give people good paying, stable jobs. That is number one. You want to know where economic development comes from? It comes from good paying, stable jobs. And so sometimes people think, well, if it doesn't have a positive impact on the environment, and I'm not opposed to businesses that have a positive impact on the environment. That's great. I would argue, by the way, that if you are not, if you're not in a business where you are, if you are engaged in activities that have a really adverse impact on the environment, that long term, that's not a viable business either. So that's an economic logic, not a moral logic. So so when people talk about social entrepreneurship, I actually get confused, because to me, the most important thing we can do in entrepreneurship, in the development world, is to help people have well-paying, stable employment. And that can be done by selling products in a retail market, just like you would do in any retail market, or it can be done by engaging in more socially oriented businesses. They're both fine. I'm not opposed to those, but I'm also not exclusive in suggesting that it has to be social in its orientation in order to have a positive social impact. I guess I'm enough in economics to know that social welfare is a function of lots of things, not just investing in green or other kinds of businesses. So I mean, that's not a popular point of view, I think. But from a practical point of view, we never turn down a firm. I mean, let me give you an example, just pretty hypothetical. So let me get practical. About 5 years ago, one of our clients was, this was in Peru, was the second largest women's cuy cooperative in Peru. Now, cuy is guinea pig. You know what guinea pigs are? Those little furry animals. But that's the Indian name, or the what's the name? I'm blanking on the language name. Anyway, it's the indigenous language name for guinea pig is cuy, because that's the sound they make. Cuy, cuy. Anyway, and for those who've never been to the Andes, it turns out that cuy is a very important source of protein in all through the Andes, in Bolivia, Chile, Peru, all up and down the Andes in South America. And culturally, cuy farming is women's work culturally. And so these are large women cooperatives that try to help these women be more effective in raising their cuy. And these are raised, by the way, just for your interest in, they look like greenhouses, sort of short greenhouses, and there'll be 10,000 cuy in these things. I mean, they're just everywhere. It's kind of fun to watch. So the question they asked us was, should they continue buying cooey food from their local supplier, or should they make their own cooey food? It's a classic vertical integration question, make or buy, right? Pretty straightforward. And in the United States, it's like a 5-second conversation. Because the United States, you would assume that the cooey food market is probably a very competitive market. I mean, lots of suppliers, because it's commodity. It's a cooey food. What are you going to do? It's commodity. And economic logic says you should not backward vertically integrate into commodity businesses. There's no profits to be made. But it turns out that in Peru, the market is not competitive. In fact, there's a monopolist in Cusco who sells cooey food, and he does exactly what monopolists should do, which is he charges very high prices for food that has very high variability in quality. Okay, so that's the question: should they build their own, make their own food? So we get the students together, and it's a make or buy decision. So they put together a 35 variable spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet with all the costs and this and that, including getting actual local prices on the machines, as opposed to what are called gringo prices, literally called gringo prices. Because those gringo prices, anything from North America, costs 3 times as much to get the same thing as it does for a local. So we got the local prices. And it turns out is if they could raise $10,000 to buy the machines, then when they put the machines in place that and made their own cooey food, that they would increase their profits per cooey by about 10 to 15% per cooey. And so it came time to present this result to the women in the cooperative. And they were, and so there were probably 40 or 50 women there. And we went through the analysis. The students went through the analysis in Spanish, and they were going through all the logic and language. And when the women saw that this could increase their profitability by 15%, they began to weep. Because it changes their lifestyle. It changes their life. It empowers them. It does all sorts of things. And then as those women began to weep, our hard-bitten MBA students started to weep, because how could you not? And so did the professors. I was there. We were in the process of changing their life, right? Now, it turns out we were wrong. It turns out it wasn't 15% increased profitability. It was actually closer to 22% increases in profitability. This is no longer the second largest women's cooperative, cooey cooperative in Peru. It's now the largest women's cooperative in cooey cooperative in Peru. The group put together a crowdfunding campaign. They were able to raise $10,000 in 2 weeks. They bought the machines, and it worked out. I also know there'll be competitive entry. I'm not silly about this. So for a while, there was going to be an increase in profitability. Now, was that a social entrepreneurship endeavor? I mean, okay, I guess the client were all mostly women. That's half the population. I'm not sure that makes it particularly social, but they were poor, but all the people we worked with were poor. I don't know. It seems to me it was a business proposal that had the effect of increasing their profitability dramatically, and then that became socially responsible. So that's the way I think about it, social entrepreneurship.
Thank you very much, Professor.
I agree. I know it's not everyone agrees with me, and that's fine.
Tuğba Hocam, your microphone is closed.
Sorry. Thank you very much. We received a question from YouTube. What is the importance of intellectual capital to create a competitive advantage in the digitalizing world?
You're very quiet.
What is the importance of intellectual capital?
Intellectual capital.
Yeah, okay. To create a competitive advantage in the digitalizing world.
Okay, there's 2 kinds of intellectual capital. Resource-based theory would suggest there's at least 2 kinds. There's the kind that's connected, that's sort of captured in one person's brain or an explicit patent or something like that. Resource-based theory suggests that's not going to be that important. And we should know, you can figure out why. So intellectual capital that's captured in a single person's brain or their abilities is general human capital. And in reasonably competitive labor markets, that will be appropriated by the person who, the value created will be appropriated by the person who has that capital, not by firms. So it wouldn't be a source of competitive advantage. What resource-based theory says is much more important for competitive advantage, and by the way, probably empirically much more important, is not the single smart guy, or man or woman, but rather intellectual capital that is co-created by a team of managers, engineers, others inside a firm. That co-creation then becomes a firm-specific capability, and thus is more likely to be a source of advantage for the firm than the ideas of a single individual. The truth is, individual human capital goes home every night. And firms don't own it in any sense. We outlawed slavery a long time ago. Took too long. Still some slavery in the world, but it's basically in all reasonable places in the world, slavery is outlawed. We don't own human capital. We don't own the intellectual component of a person's brain, their ideas, their thoughts, their emotions. Firms don't own any of those things, nor should they. And so you can't earn a profit based on something you don't have a property right over. But when there's co-specialized investments, when a team of individuals working together create intellectual capital, then no single individual owns all of that. It's collectively owned. And the difference between what the firm pays to get access to all those individuals and the value they create collectively, that difference is economic value that is at least partly appropriable by the firm in the form of an economic profit. So yeah, intellectual capabilities are extremely important, but not if they are for firm competitive advantage, but not if they're completely captured by a single individual. It's interesting, we did a research project. We never got the data where we wanted it to, so it never came out, but I can share you the general results. The dependent variable was the salary of management professors in US schools. So everyone was interested in that dependent variable, right? So, schools just in the United States. We had data just in the United States. And we had two kinds of independent variables. One was like number of publications and citations, okay? Which, by the way, is classic general human capital. It's valuable at any university. So if you have a lot of publications that are cited a lot, those are valuable no matter where you work. Okay. And the second class of variables were more firm-specific in character. There were things like willingness to work with assistant professors as co-authors or doctoral students as co-authors, and willingness to accept various managerial positions inside the university. Much more firm-specific. Okay. But the thing that's interesting about that is, so we run the numbers, and it turns out that, not surprisingly, the number of publications and their citations has a huge impact on salary, okay, as it should. If it didn't, something would be wrong. But so did those firm-specific human capital. The reason that happens is, our theory was that when you make a specific investment in a firm, two things are happening. One thing that's happening is you're creating extra value for that university, for that company, by making those investments. But there's also a general human capital component in it, because you're also demonstrating your willingness and ability to make such firm-specific investments. So what happens is there's a co-creation here. I invest in my assistant professors and in building a culture in my department, and the college is better off, and I'm better off because people see he's a guy who can make these kinds of investments. So this is the example of sharing how the value that's being created through the team production can be shared by the individual, because it's general human capital, and also can make the firm better off as well. So that's an example.
Okay, thank you very much. So Abdulmennan, would you like to ask a question?
You guys are
Yes.
really organized.
Thank you very much, Professor, for telling us valuable information about the intellectual capacity and intelligibility. My question was related, I will actually rephrase the question of my colleague that was asked before regarding the role of stakeholders under the terms, under the conditions of uncertainty. I wanted to ask that if we talk about the strategy in the same context, that how the strategy would help, what would be the role of strategy of a company in the context of uncertainty?
Yeah. So, the problem is that we always live in a world of at least partial uncertainty, even as an individual. You know, some major things like where are you going to live in 5 years? You have no idea. So I mean, I have no idea. So I think, and again, by the way, Professor Alvarez and I, in our work on creation theory, really focus mostly on what do entrepreneurs do in the face of uncertainty. Because you can't calculate the present value of an activity, and thus all traditional economic logic is out the window. But you still have to do something. She doesn't like this language, but she's not here, so I can use it. So in that the traditional economic logic for making decisions is, it's like when you aiming a gun, it's ready, aim, fire, right? But in uncertainty, you don't know where the target is, you don't know if you have a bullet, you don't know if the gun's pointed the right direction, you don't know. So in uncertainty, the action is fire, ready, aim. It's just exactly the opposite. It's what Sarah Saraswati calls effectuation. You don't have causal logic, you have effectual logic. You start from the back, the end, and you go the other way. And it's easy that's cute, isn't that clever? It's fun. But what does that actually mean in terms of managerial practice? I don't know. I don't think we understand what it is managers actually do under conditions of uncertainty. I will tell you what a lot of them do. They pretend it's risk. That is, they say since we can't really do uncertainty, we're going to pretend it's risk, and we're going to pretend as if we can collect all these data and we can do all this analysis. You see this in large companies all the time, where a decision has to be made, and the CEO or senior manager in charge will simply not make the decision because they don't have enough information to make the optimal decision. And they delay until it's too late, and the decision is made for them by the competitive environment, and they lose. So this risk aversion, it's actually, to me, it's uncertainty aversion. It's not risk aversion. That's actually a better way of characterizing it. So some people are better at taking action in the face of uncertainty than others. When I work with managers, I put it this way. Point one, if you wait to have all the necessary information to make a decision, it will be too late. Point two is, in the face of uncertainty, the task is to make the best decision you can. I'm not saying don't go out there and find out what you can find out. Make the best decision you can. And then your job is to turn that decision into the right decision. The correctness of the decision is ex post, it's not ex ante. That's what uncertainty forces you to do. So the managerial task is, okay, we thought blue pens were going to be the big seller. We made a complete bet on blue pens. And it turns out that gray pens, it looked like people might have more interest in gray pens. So we didn't know it. We didn't know ahead of time what the choices were. So it was under uncertainty. Certainly blue versus gray, we didn't know. But once it becomes clear that there's a few people who are interested in gray pens, and we're already fully committed to blue pens, how do we convince people to stop buying gray pens and start buying blue pens? We're going to turn this into the right decision. We don't know for sure what the right decision is ex ante, but we can make it the right decision ex post. And that's takes, I don't know, things like leadership, charisma, stuff that we don't study anymore because it's very hard to put in a laboratory, but nevertheless, extremely important to organizations. So that's to me, that's a really different way of thinking about decision-making and implementation. Ex ante the right decision versus ex post making it the right decision. I don't know. That's a dissertation there, I would think.
Thank you.
So I tell you, I just thought of that. That's a great paper. I want to write that paper.
Shevval, would you like to ask a question?
Hello.
Hello. How do you have a U with umlauts? How do you pronounce the U with umlauts in your name?
I am very excited.
Büyük.
Professor, it is Ü. It is büyük yüksel. Yes.
U.
Büyük,
Okay.
büyük yüksel.
Okay. I was going to say that. Look, most of the names are okay. That one was complicated.
I
So,
am
go
very
ahead.
excited. My question, where and how companies can gather these valuable, rare, non-substable, and imperfectly immutable resources?
How do they get them? So, so one thing we have to clear up, they don't actually have to buy the resources. All they really need to have is have access to the resources.
Yes.
Okay, so important distinction. You know, in 1986, I published a paper that tried to develop an answer to this question. And it says that, and it depends on the competitiveness of the factor markets in which they are operating to get access to these resources and capabilities, the strategic factor markets. And there's basically two ways that you can do this. One is you can get lucky. That is, you can get access to a resource that everyone thinks is worth $20, and it turns out it's worth $50, and you were lucky. And by the way, a lot of entrepreneurs are lucky, and they make a lot of money. Then they get on YouTube, and we start listening to them as if they're smart, and start believing that they have some special insights, and that's all just stupid beyond imagining. They're just, you know, some people got lucky and then they get a lot of money and then that lets them do other things, but they were lucky. So that's one way. The other way, the more managerially interesting way, is to take resources and capabilities that you already have and then match those with access to new resources and capabilities. And then in the matching process, create more value with those resources and capabilities than anyone else has. So that's why strategic factor market theory leads inevitably back to asking the question, what rare and concentrated resources and capabilities do you currently have? And how can we leverage those in gaining access to new resources and capabilities? So it always starts with what you already have. And where that came from, it can come from lots of places: history, accidents, all those things. History plays an important role, but those are the things you look for. Now, so I say you look for things that are socially complex, path-dependent, or causally ambiguous. Those are the resources and capabilities that are most likely to be costly to imitate and rare. And if you can then use those to create extra value by acquiring access to new resources and capabilities, then that's what resource-based theory says. That's how you win the game. Now, resource-based theory cannot generate a list of here are the 10 critical resources and capabilities every firm must have in order to gain a sustained competitive advantage. Such a list would be a violation of the rules for riches paradox that I told you earlier, and so you can't do that. All I can do is say, I can do two things. The first thing I can say is, this is not likely to be a source of sustained competitive advantage. Okay, so I was working for a company once. I asked them why they were so successful, and their answer was, because it's our top management team. I said, okay, tell me about it. Well, we're this, we're wonderful. We feel like we've been working together for 20 years. We're all on the same page. Okay, great. Top management team, super. Tell me about the top management teams of your competitors. They're very good. They're, okay, it's valuable, it's not rare. Okay, so sorry, it can't beat your top management team. It's a source of competitive parity, not advantage. So we can use that logic to identify resources and capabilities that are not likely to be sources of sustained competitive advantage. And by the way, managers are really bad at this. I mean, I make a lot of money just saying, no, that's not it. No, that's not it. No, that's not it. Because the engineers are the worst. I'm sorry for the engineers in the room, but it's like, it's like, what's special about your technology? Or ours is smaller than anyone else's. How long will it take people to copy your smallness? About 6 weeks. But we're small and we're a different color. Well, how long will it take for people to paint theirs a different color? 2 weeks. We're smaller, a different color, and faster. How much longer? 3 weeks. I mean, it's never about, almost never about the technology. It's about the ability to generate technologies. Innovativeness is a source of competitive advantage. Innovations are not. So I can tell people what doesn't work. And I can tell them what could work, but I can't tell them for sure that it will work. So I always tell my students this way. I said in this class, I'm bold, I say, I'm never wrong, but I'm not always right. That is, I can tell you for sure it won't work, but I can't tell you for sure that what will work. I'll give you my students feedback. Can you see what it says? I'm not always, it says, I'm not always right, but I'm never wrong.
Okay, thank you. Ali, I think you have also additional question.
Hi, Professor.
Yes, Ali.
What kind of researches do you think will be more valuable, rare, non-substitutable, and infinitely imitable in this new era? Thank you.
Okay, I can boldly answer that question. I don't know. Think about it. If I knew, you're asking for rules for riches. If I knew what were going to be the most important resources and capabilities, I wouldn't tell you. I'd go start companies and they had those resources and capabilities. So I don't know. I mean, so let's go back to the entrepreneurship literature. Okay, the future is not out there waiting to be discovered by really smart people. Because there are a lot of really smart people and they all have around roughly the same information. No, the future is being created right now by people like you. You're creating research questions and opportunities and ways of thinking about the world that no one's thought of yet. And I can't predict what that's going to be. I have no idea. I can tell you that in this new world, this new digital world, that if you the highest probability of those kinds of resources and capabilities that are sources of sustained competitive advantage are going to be those that are socially complex, path dependent, and causally ambiguous. But the value creation, which is how you take your current resources and capabilities and map them with access to new resources and capabilities in a way that creates more value than otherwise would be the case. Can't help you there.
Okay, thank you.
I can be bold here. What's that?
Do you have another question, Çiğdem Hoca?
I don't have a question, but I have a suggestion as an answer to the previous question. Professor, what do you think about how well organizations employ flexible work arrangements? Maybe such a source of competitive advantage. What do you think about this?
Well,
flexible work arrangements, meaning, working from home, working flexibly and online, and if it is possible, of course, except the production facilities, etc.
Sure. And there are some people who argue that even production facilities with 3D printing will become flexible at some point too. That's a bit science fiction yet. So let's just take resource-based logic and say, and apply it to the question. So flexible work relationships, which is great. This is the first, today is the first day I've been in my office for over a month, you know, so I finished teaching, so. However, if all firms have access to the same technology and all firms are equally skilled at implementing that technology to facilitate flexible working, then those technologies would not be a source of competitive advantage for any one firm. Now, the reality is firms are going to vary at least on two dimensions. One dimension is the ability they have, the willingness to make the changes ability they have to make those kinds of changes. And second, do they operate in a sector or an industry where that kind of dispersed workforce is at least less problematic, if not more valuable. My suspicion is that some firms will do really well with this and other firms will do very poorly with this. Understanding what those capability differences are in a way systematically so we can sort of understand what the difference between those firms are it's really an important research area. But there's not a company I'm working with right now. Well, there's two things. Every company I'm working with right now is dealing with this question about flexible working relationships. And they all come up with the same answers, which is working home for 3 days and come in for 2 or something like that. They're all roughly the same answers. So those answers are not going to be sources of competitive advantage. That said, organizations that are able to, despite these new working relationships, organizations that are able to build and maintain a strong organizational culture, they're still going to have an advantage over firms that don't have such an organizational culture, regardless of whether they are dispersed or not. So I would look for, that's because culture is socially complex. I would argue that that's going to be the important distinguishing feature.
Don't you also think that these flexible work arrangements may also have a potential to change culture in a positive direction?
Could be positive. Could be positive. Could be negative. I mean, my conversations with senior managers is that when people work from home and don't come into the office, it's very hard to create organizational culture, a sense of connection and relationship with the firm. We're seeing a very high turnover rate among employees these days that have these work and home relationships with their employment relationships. They don't have the same sense of social connection to the firm that they had. So, now, does that mean it's always negative? No. I imagine some firms are able to figure out ways to create a sense of cohesion. I am writing a book on this, sense of cohesion, despite not having the luxury of having people come to the office all the time. There are aspects of I know, for example, there's some early work. I won't be able to cite it in detail, but that, for example, that women feel more empowered when working from home. They're more able to make contributions in meetings, those kinds of things. So those are all positive things, clearly. But you didn't ask. I thought you did. The question I thought you asked is, to what extent could those work relationships be sources of competitive advantage? Everything you described are sources of value creation, but not necessarily of competitive advantage, right?
I understand what you say, yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And it may also be different for the cases of different organizations working in different industries in different countries, because you say that everyone is making it like 3 days online and then 2 days at the office. And it is not like that, for instance, in our own country. It cannot be generalized, at least. So this is why, yeah, it will be kind of a timing issue, maybe, to compare. Yeah.
I'm oversimplifying to make the point, whether it's 2 or 3 or some hybrid, everyone's struggling with these issues. No one has any, there's no, if there was an optimal solution, everyone would immediately go there and it would have been taken care of. So there'll be a lot of experimenting that goes around it. And the real trick is how do you manage those relationships in a way that create distinctive value? That's the real challenge. We'll see. That will be interesting.
Thank you. Sarah,
Thank you.
would you like to ask a question?
Sure, yes. Hello, everyone. Hello, Dr. Barney. It was
Hi.
a very informative session. Thank you. So I wanted to ask, what are your suggestions for researchers in the field of organizational studies? And, in which areas they should conduct research?
Yeah, I'm going to be bold again. I don't know.
You don't know.
No, the reason I don't know is this. Listen, there's two ways. There's 2 ways to pick a research topic that parallel exactly the 2 ways you choose a strategy, right? One way to choose a strategy is, what's an attractive industry? Go there. The other way is, what am I interested in? Do that. I think. So when it comes to research projects, some people say, well, what's a hot topic? Here's how that hot topic model works, okay? Find a hot topic, develop the theory, collect the data, write the paper, and you'll have your paper submitted to a journal just about the time the topic is no longer hot. It's a bad strategy. It's bad way to go. Besides that, you end up studying stuff you're not interested in. Why would you do that? I met with a doctoral student once many, many years ago. And I said, well, what are you interested in? And this guy he's talking about all this great ideas. He's had this excitement and he's just such energy. I said, oh, great. Sounds like you really love your dissertation. He says, oh, no, that's not my dissertation. What's your dissertation? Well, I had this data set that I'm studying. Why'd you do that? Well, because I get access to the data set. Are you kidding me? You have all this passion and ideas for this thing, and then you're going to waste 2 years of your life doing something you hate? What is this craziness? Okay, so that's a bad idea. The right way to figure out what to study is to start where you are, who you are. All the best research is autobiographical. And in ways that are very difficult for people to understand, perhaps, but maybe you can understand. What are your passions? What gets you excited? What makes you? And you can't ask anyone else. You can't go to managers and say, what should you study? They always tell you the wrong thing. Always. They tell you the problem they're facing right now. And I'm not denying that's an important problem. It's just that that's not what we do. We study theory questions. We don't solve your problems. I remember when unemployment was really low in the United States and no one could get anyone to get a job. There's just no, the unemployment rate was like 2%. It's just not that long ago, really. And we had a panel of senior managers, and we asked, what is the biggest problem you face in your business right now? And all of them was the same thing. We have a hard time attracting employees. And my response, I didn't say this out loud, I didn't want to throw anyone at the bus, but my response was, wait 3 years, the economy will turn around, you'll have plenty of opportunities. That's not a long-term problem, it's a short-term problem. You can make a lot of money as an economist, by the way, during good times, telling CEOs it will get worse, and during bad times, telling CEOs it will get better, and because you're always right. So, so don't ask managers. They're not. Don't ask senior professors. They're all in the past. I'm in the past. I'm the old guy. I'll talk about my new research, but stuff I did in 1984. I wrote these papers in 1984. You guys weren't alive in 1984, okay? It's fun history. I got it, but I'm much more excited about the stuff that I'm currently doing that I don't know the answers to, that I am confused by. So don't ask me. Don't ask your senior professors, and they'll try to tell you anyway. Just ignore them. Just smile. Yeah. Do what you want to do. And then take it. And of course, it's an uncertain choice. Welcome to the real world. It's uncertain. So you make a decision ex ante, and then you make it the right decision ex post. You do the research you want to do, and then you convince the whole world that it was the right thing to do.
The right decision.
That's the task. It's not the, that's how you make a difference. That reveals my preference. It's a source of economic profit. It's a competitive advantage. If you want to be just another person, then, just do the 57th study on the 47th topic that adds the one variable and then squares it, and wake me up when you're done. I have a rule of thumb. When people start publishing papers on alternative measures of an independent variable, there are 6 ways of measuring X. One, here are the advantages. It's time to find a new topic.
Thank you.
I think you
I
don't.
can't hear anyone.
Samet, would you like to ask a question?
Of course. Hello, dear professor. Thank you for your valuable information.
No problem.
And what are your suggestions for today's managers?
Since heterogeneity and diversity is at the core of my theoretical.
أنا داخلة من يوتيوب donc je sais pas واش نبان.
Since that's what I do, I'm very reluctant to generalize and say, here's what I would tell all managers. I did, when I give speeches to managers, which I do, I talk about resource-based theory as a way of thinking about their organizations. But when I work with them one-on-one, I have a client that I'm working with right now that faces 2 challenges. The first is to figure out what those challenges are, articulate them, and then second, how to figure out ways of responding. So it's very idiosyncratic. It's, they all apply the basic theory. The theory still holds, but I would not. When you hire me, you're hiring idiosyncratic advice. You're not hiring generic advice, and so I'm reluctant to give much more than. I will tell them about resource-based theory. Actually, I don't tell them about resource theory. I apply resource-based theory. By the way, when you get really good at these theories, I have this toolbox of theories. Transaction costs, real options, complete contracting, Porter framework, resource-based theory, and I go into these companies and they'll ask a question, and I'll say, "Oh, well, that's a transaction cost question." Boom, just pull that theory out and apply it. Makes you look really smart because you ask questions they never would have thought of. But they're like, well, like in TCE, for example, someone will say, "We're going to do this," and I'll say, "Well, you can either make that or you can buy it. Tell me about the market for this commodity." And they'll tell you, "Well, I thought about that, make or buy." That's right. So anyway, the theories are quite powerful. And so using them is very helpful, but you have to use them in the context of a particular firm and particular setting.
Okay, thank you very much.
What's our timing left on this? I want to make sure we're on time.
We will have just 2 more questions, and that's
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we received a question from YouTube, and they ask, is the resource-based view the opposite to the industry effectiveness model?
Is the opposite of the industrial organization point of view. So I would say industrial organization should be, that's not the right language. The right language would be the structure, conduct, performance view in industrial organization. Industrial organizational economics is a big tent. And structured content performance is a smaller tent within that big tent. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. There are certainly circumstances where the right theoretical lens is the one that's derived from structured content performance. So, for example, I had a client once. I usually get called in to give speeches on resource-based theory, right? But over lunch, it became clear that these guys didn't need to hear resource-based theory. They needed to hear a Porter. I was supposed to put on my mic. I had to channel Mike Porter. They had their industry segment was there were two firms that between the two of them had 95% of the U.S. market in this segment. This company, my client, dominated the eastern part of the United States. The other firm dominated the western part of the United States. The products were actually pretty simple, bent metal of various kinds. Some complications on application, but basically bent metal from a manufacturing point of view. So they get, but very strong brand names. So basically I got an oligopoly with high barriers to entry. This is still you should do Michael Porter here. I'm sorry. Now I have to set aside the social welfare consequences of this, because by the way, one of the implications of this is that they should never innovate. And if they innovate, they should do it very slowly. And every year they should raise prices. So none of those, and I am a customer of one of these companies. And the first time I bought this thing, I said, why does this thing cost $600? It's just bent metal. Well, now I know why. They're operating in an oligopoly with high barriers to entry. Okay. So there are times when that's the right, from the firm's point of view, is the right thing to do. But most industries with global competition, most industries are not in a world of oligopolies with high barriers to entry. You know, you're dealing with competitors from Turkey, from Greece, from Italy, from Northern Europe, from China, from Vietnam. I mean, all the time. It's very competitive. And coming up with a distinctiveness in that context is kind of hard to do, but that's the world we live in. And so I don't say we're opposite. It's a little more nuanced than opposite. I would say different. So the theory of economic value generation in SCP is monopoly and with high barriers to entry, or oligopoly with high barriers to entry. And the theory in resource-based theory is efficiency rents, efficiency profits. So they're different, but that doesn't mean you can never apply the SCP. Now, there are, I think, fewer opportunities to apply that one than there are resource-based theory, but that's an empirical question, not a theoretical question.
Bilgehan is going to ask the last question. Yeah, Bilgehan.
Last question.
Yeah, last question.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Professor Barney. I think it was a great interview, and thank you for all of the knowledge you share with us. I would like to ask a question about management education.
Education.
Yes. Do you think undergraduate and graduate education in the field of management and organization will change in the near future? And if your answer is yes, what kind of changes should we expect?
Well, the almost certain answer is no. It won't change. The most reluctant to change people I've ever met in my life are college professors. Basically, once college professors figure out a way to teach a class, they don't change. And so I'm kind of joking there, but we've all faced a really interesting problem with COVID, you know, and online versus in person. And yeah, I don't think I think we're moving in and moving out, moving in and moving out of this crisis, but hopefully we'll get over it at some point and get back to normal, and that we'll see. But I think we'll probably get back to normal just about the time we finally really learn how to do online education. But there'll be some things that will be permanently changed. I don't doubt that. But I have to tell you that I teach in a business school. So I have a very different worldview. I don't get lectures. I don't understand. Why don't we have lectures? If we want to have 5 forces lecture, let's go, Mike Porter, do your thing, and then we'll show the video. You want to resource-based theory? I'll give a lecture and they'll show the video. It's not a big deal. I don't know why professors have to give lectures. I don't understand it. I don't know. Ever since the invention of movable type, I've not understood why we have lectures. Read the dang book. And if you have questions, let's talk about it. But it's a conversation. So my classes are conversations. They're not lectures. They're conversations about cases, but they're still conversations. And conversations, multi-person conversations over 2 hours, very hard to pull off online. Very hard. We're doing pretty well here, but still it's not as interactive as it would be in person. And so there are people who say they haven't figured it out. I'm skeptical, but that's fine. I can learn. Fortunately, I won't have to. So I think there'll be some aspects of it. In terms of substance, so those would be sort of process changes. Substantively changes. I think that if we do the work, theoretical work required to make stakeholder theory more rigorous, we will see it become to diffuse throughout the curriculum. But if we don't do that, then it won't diffuse, because it doesn't answer all the questions that it needs to answer. So there's a lot of work to be done intellectually before I'm going to stand up in front of a group of MBA students and say, this is what you have to do if you're going to take a stakeholder perspective. I'm not sure I can say that. I can say a few things now, but I have a lot more to learn. So from a teaching point of view, that's, again, a huge opportunity. There's this alleged distinction between teaching and research that to me doesn't exist. It may exist for some people, which I find tragic, because so much of our life is given over to teaching. And if you teach stuff, if you do research stuff that has no implications for your teaching, then it's like schizophrenic. It's not a very good way of living. But my teaching notes are this week's research notes. I mean, I'm always pushing the envelope in class. And so I make mistakes all the time. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We'll see. It's okay. We're learning together as a partnership, co-creation of knowledge. So for me, the theoretical problems that are created by taking the stakeholder perspective, which are really daunting, will inform my teaching dramatically. I'm in the process of contemplating and revising my textbook, strategy textbook, and doing 2 radical things that will probably be rejected by professors everywhere. The first is to say that 5 forces efforts to evaluate the attractiveness of the industry are completely misguided. You cannot evaluate the attractiveness of the industry independent of the resources and capabilities of firms that are entering that industry. Its attractiveness does not exist independent of what you bring to the table. The second is to try to say, okay, if we took stakeholder logic seriously, what would happen to things like our measures of firm performance? They all suck. None of them work. Tobin's Q, the only thing worry about Tobin's Q worries about is shareholders. Economic value added, shareholders. I mean, it's all shareholder oriented. Accounting doesn't work because that's for other reasons. They do accounting for other reasons. So I don't know, but those are the kinds of problems that are created by my theory or theoretical work. My kind of teaching problems are created by theoretical work. So. But if you're going to make a bet about how things would change over the next 10 years, the answer is they probably won't change very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Professor. It's our honor, pleasure that we met with you. Thank you very much for your time, for your patience. We would like to
Well,
thank
I hope to be able to see you all in person sometime soon.
Yeah, and Professor Elçin Alpaca will also have some closing comments, I think. Thank you very
Sure.
much for joining our
Thank you.
webinar. We are very happy. Thank you very much. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I also want to thank you, Professor Barney. It was thank you for all knowledge you give us and to our students, and also valuable ideas for us. Thank you very much for this meeting, for this interview. We also want to see you face-to-face meeting in Istanbul. Please be our guests here. Thank you for this meeting.
Thank you very much. Talk to you guys later. See you later.
Just let us know, okay? Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Be careful. Be safe.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.